Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today we're going to be talking about the importance of storytelling. Joining me today is Stacey Picard, who is the founder, chief storyteller, and director of the Urban Stories Project. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Catherine.
So this is a very interesting idea, and how you came to understand that there's a great unmet need for lots of different kinds of organizations to help people to tell their story.
Yeah, it's been quite a path, actually. I would say that I didn't start out intentionally seeking a path to storytelling, but I would say that storytelling sort of made its way to me. When my husband and I moved to the area just about 5 years ago, I decided to do some volunteer work and start to get involved with some nonprofits to learn the area and the work that's being done, where the needs are, and to meet different people. And the two projects I was doing at the time were tutoring first graders in math at our neighborhood elementary school, and then on Sundays serving lunch at some in the districts so others may eat,
yeah.
Very well-known service provider for homeless and poor people. And I was so struck with, when working with these 6 and 7-year-old kids at the school, and it was a high poverty, very diverse school, that these were kids that had their challenges. They were just such little beams of energy and light. You know, they hadn't been sort of made cynical by the world yet. They were just these little bright lights. And on the other end of the spectrum, at some, on the weekends, I would see people walk in just completely broken and chewed up and spit out by the world. And this was really nagging at me about how did these folks coming in for lunch off the street get from the point where they were these little 6-year-olds also getting tutored in math, because they started there too, you know. Nobody wakes up and says, I think I'll be homeless and I'll choose to sleep under the bridge and that'll be the path I take. So this was really nagging at me, and I started to talk with friends about how to mine those stories and just kind of recognize that arc for those people, and in a way that kind of restores their dignity as people, and not just this broad brush that we paint them with, homeless or poor. And in the course of doing that, a friend that I was talking to said, you know, you need to talk to Theater Lab in DC. They're doing some sort of story work like this. And I reached out, cold called their co-director and founder, Deb Gottesman, and she graciously agreed to meet with me and tell me about their Life Stories program, which is their community outreach program. They work with marginalized communities, AIDS patients, wounded warriors, homeless women in addiction, and they help them to share their stories and then create an artistic piece, a film or a dramatic stage piece, using elements of their stories. And I immediately said, I have to be a part of this. I'd like to volunteer in any way I can. So I started to volunteer at N Street Village, another very well-known service provider in the district, working miracles with women. And at that time, the program was directed by Tom Workman, a master. He'd been there for about a decade, and not just at N Street, but doing a lot of community theater work. And I just fell in love with that program and with those women, and the power of storytelling, how it empowered them to find their voice, to own their story. You know, how it made them, again, more than just what we would put them in a box to be. So at that time, Theater Lab was opening a Life Stories Institute. They wanted to train instructors to go out in their communities and do more of this kind of work. And I went through that institute and was certified to be an instructor. And it so happened that Tom was leaving town to work on another project. And so I became the director of that program. And I've been directing it for almost 3 years now, ever since. And it's very, very dear to my heart. So that sort of, that was kind of the spark that lit the flame. And the more I have dug into it and met different people and learned about different opportunities to use storytelling, I've just realized there's a whole world out there for these different expressions of storytelling.
And storytelling is a lot of things. It might be writing your story, it might be poetry, it might be an acting piece or improvisation, which I've just learned about. So there's lots of different ways that people use, or different methods or means or avenues that people use to tell their story. So you're basically helping people to discover what might be the path for them, and then coaching them through it.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. There are so many expressions of it. So again, the Theater Lab program is all about creating a dramatic piece or a film. I've always been interested in creating some sort of book as an output. I did some programs with middle school students in an inner city school in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm from. And one in particular was just with middle school girls, and it was all about empowering young women at that age and recognizing kind of the media images that they're bombarded with, and understanding that they're more than that, and giving them the tools to kind of discern all of that. And the output of that was a book of poetry that they wrote in that session, with photographs of them also in that session, and they all got to take that away. I'm working now with I know that you've talked with Friends of Guest House,
yes,
a women's reentry program in Alexandria. I've done quite a few projects with them, and I'm working with them and another partner on the idea about creating a book that documents the stories of the women that are going through Guest House, which kind of validates their stories and is a really special, kind of tangible thing for them to hang on to, but also serves as a fundraising piece for Guest House, and something that shows the impact that they're really having in the community with the work that they do.
And sometimes things are cyclical. I was very interested because I went to see Nia Vardalos in a show called, what was that show called?
Tiny Beautiful Things.
And it was based on the book, Tiny Beautiful Things.
Right.
So she was Dear Sugar, and people wrote in questions. So all kinds of people wrote in questions. Her essays were things of beauty. Things of beauty. And so it became a book. And I love the book, and I gave the book out to everyone.
Right.
But then Nia Vardalos, who really was totally independent of Cheryl Strayed, decided to make a play from the book. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to me. So people write poetry. You can perform that. You can do a poetry slam. Spoken word poetry slams are very, very popular. And so it's kind of cyclical what you start with. If you start with the written and it becomes a performance piece, or you start with the performance pieces that you then write down and capture into something like a book.
That's right. And there are what might seem like more tangible and practical outputs for it as well. Some of the work I've done at Guest House has included coaching those women on how to shape their stories when they interview for a job. Their conviction can be a hurdle when they talk about that for employment. And so helping them to sort of narrate how that conviction, it was a moment in their life and not the thing that defines them. I mean, none of us want to be remembered or defined completely from the worst thing we've ever done.
That's right.
Or the worst decision we've ever made. So we have to talk about that in a way that the employer sees that there's more to the person they're interviewing and the gifts that they bring to the job than just this bump in the road that they had. That's been very tangible. I've also done some work with some high school students in Southeast DC that are working on their college applications and applications for scholarship, shaping their stories in order to kind of convey what makes them who they are and what they want to pursue and why. So some people might consider that a little bit of a more tangible output, but it's very useful and also very empowering.
And everybody needs a coach. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. Like, you might have some innate ability, you might have some talent, but without a coach, you never really recognize or realize or hone that to be something else. And so I think we all tell ourselves stories. Of course, we all tell ourselves stories that explain who we are and why we feel the way we do or why we've made the choices that we've made. But actually trying to put that into some words to compellingly and convincingly explain to someone else, you need kind of a coach to help you through that.
Yeah, I think that's true. There is a structure to story, and it's pretty simple. It begins, something happens, there's a change that occurs because of the thing that happened, and it ends. And that's really all there is to it. But it has to begin in a strong way, it has to end in a strong way, and it has to really focus on what those barriers or obstacles or challenges were, those turning points, those things that kind of shaped how we were after versus how we were before that happened. And sometimes it just takes an outsider, a second eye or ear to say, what if we told it this way, or what you're really, or I can tell you have the thread of a very powerful story here, but you're sort of dancing around it, like you're not quite ready to say it out loud, or you're saying everything but that. So there's some refinement that goes on there.
So it's kind of like, so in writing that's having an editor.
Yeah.
You know, and in storytelling, and I know in working with the women at Friends of Guest House, they did a panel. I moderated a panel where they told their story in front of a room full of people, and for 3 of them, it was the first time they'd ever done that.
That's right. I actually worked with those folks. They had that event coming up at Busboys, and they had been speaking in the community quite often. But in learning about this kind of story coaching, the director there, Carrie Galloway, as you know, is fantastic.
She is.
And she really saw the value in this and wondered, would I come in and meet with these women that were going to speak? And I was happy to do that. And yeah, and it really was, that opened a whole other door to opportunities, especially in this area where there are so many nonprofits serving so many different groups and so much legislation that's happening. So it's not uncommon for a lawmaker to call and say, I'm working on a specific piece of legislation. I'd like to know from this organization that serves people affected by it, how are those people affected? I would like people who have been personally affected by this to come in and tell their story in a way that illustrates how voting for this law or not voting for this law, or how we write this law, will impact their day-to-day life. And so that's a whole other opportunity where I'm starting to get a lot more interest. And it's not just the clients, it's working with the organizations as well. With Guest House, again, I'm working on a proposal with that director to lead a staff retreat after the first of the year to help them in how they advocate for Guest House. How do you tell the story about what it is you do, with the impact that you have, and what I like to call that sort of what's the Jimmy Stewart movie that's out right? It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life effect. You know, what would the world look like if you didn't exist? If you had never been born?
Right.
That's the story that you need to kind of tell so that people have that aha moment about, wow, this really matters. And it's more than what I thought about before, which was just homeless, you know, incarcerated, those labels or boxes that we use.
That is a fascinating perspective. And when we return from our break, we're going to talk with Stacey Picard more in depth about how she is helping organizations as well as individuals to develop and hone their stories, because storytelling really is the currency in today's concept or understanding of what problems really exist. So please join us after this break.
Your daughter is having trouble learning French. Do you A, hire a tutor?
Bonjour.
B, enforce a French-only rule at home? Or C, watch some foreign films? When it comes to parenting, there are no perfect answers, but that's okay, because you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Teens in foster care will love you just the same.
We are neighbors and best friends.
I love my sister.
My heart doesn't see race. Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.
Oh, look, a redhead.
Staring contest.
You still got it.
I know.
Come alive with the forest.
The dad was cute.
You were looking right at us.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and I'm talking with Stacey Picard today of the Urban Stories Project about the importance of storytelling. Thank you so much for being here and for talking with us about concepts that I think are going to be new to a lot of people. When we went to our break, we were talking about how organizations need to tell the story in a way that makes people consider what would the world be like if their organization didn't exist.
Right.
Our legislative session just started here in Virginia this past week, and for clients who are being asked to testify in front of a committee, you know, what special kind of support do executive directors need? What kind of help can you offer organizations to help not just their staff and executive director, who also interface with policymakers, but how do you convince the clients who are the recipients of your direct services, how do you give them confidence to sit in a large room in the state capitol in front of a large committee and tell a personal story?
It takes a little work. You don't just send them in cold, because that's a very intimidating situation. They have their stories, obviously. They're very intimate to them and they've lived them. And it's not that they withhold them or don't want to share them, but that you have to leave some space for creating a safe space to share your story and for building trust. And not just trust for you, the storyteller, to talk to me, the listener, but you have to leave some space for them to trust themselves to access their own story and to feel like this matters. You know, I matter, and I own this, and it deserves to be told. I deserve to have this voice. A lot of the groups that I work with tend to be marginalized communities, and their stories have been drowned out. And so a lot of the initial work is just saying, getting them back to, hey, you matter. There's some dignity to your story, and people deserve to hear it, and you deserve to tell it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to rip your heart out and share every detail of everything that's ever happened to you. Your story should not start with, I was born in Virginia Beach in 1954. It should be a little more succinct than that. So we work on structure, but really a lot of it is just building trust and confidence in owning their voice.
And so sometimes there are constraints, especially in public hearings where you might have 5 minutes or you might have 3 minutes. So helping people to understand it's not that their whole story isn't important, but you've only got 3 minutes to make a point. So what do you want people to understand?
Right, that's exactly right. What do you want, who is your audience, first of all? And what do you want that audience to take away? What do you want them to know about you? I would say, though, the thing that might be counterintuitive about all of this is we're not talking about spin or influence or trying to persuade somebody to have a certain position. We're just saying be authentic. Authentically tell your truth. You're not trying to get them to believe something. You're just trying to connect with them emotionally, to their heart, human to human, so that they understand, they start to recognize that underlying commonality that we all share. And that's what makes them think, boy, I could be sitting where you're sitting. That could so easily be my story. And so that's really the important thing. You might think that you have to go in there with this agenda and make sure that you hit these 3 points and that you say it in a way that they're going to believe it. You obviously want to think about the story that you want to tell, but the most important element of it is being genuine and having authenticity in telling it.
So how is the best way for nonprofits to engage with you?
In terms of the work, there are so many expressions of this. I've mentioned a couple of them, board and staff retreat. I think that's a really great way to get everyone singing the same song. You know, how do you talk about the impact that your organization is having? How, even working with your staff, how are you telling the story about what you do that gets them invested in the work? Because these aren't the highest paid people on the planet.
No, and they don't necessarily come in with this skill set. You know, and you and I have talked about before, you know, we have an education system that rewards, validates, measures technical achievement.
Yeah.
Do you have a skill? Have you mastered this knowledge? We don't necessarily teach emotional intelligence or soft skills in our school system, and yet in the workplace, more and more, we're starting to realize that if you don't have this emotional intelligence, if you don't have these soft skills, no matter how much you know or how technically gifted you are, you're not really accomplishing because you're not really connecting.
That's right. I think that's so true. I think we've moved away. There's been so much conversation about this recently, especially in the area of politics. We've become so tribal and we're so siloed. And we, with technology and social media, we've been able to create our own little bubble of people that are like us and things that interest us. And many times we don't stretch beyond that. And as a result, we've lost some level of connectedness. And that's what makes it easy to stop seeing the humanity in another person and makes the storytelling so effective. When you hear it and you're profoundly moved by it, you remember, this isn't a video clip on Facebook. This is a real life. And it matters especially for advocacy and with legislators because there's been a lot of gaming in politics lately, but what they're doing affects real people. There are real consequences that affect the way people move through their lives. And helping them to understand that, I think, is really an important element of what they do.
So what you're doing, because I think it is new, and I think a lot of organizations, whether it's educational organizations or nonprofit organizations or industries, have not really elevated storytelling as a skill that their employees or the people that they serve or the people that they work with need to have. And so moving forward, how through the Urban Stories Project are you going to try to put out to all of these people the importance of developing this? This needs to be in your budget for next year.
Right.
Like you need to carve out time for professional development should include this.
Right. That's exactly right. People are not writing, they do not have a storytelling line on their budget yet. But I hope to see that change. I'm talking to them about the importance of it, and I think as we do the work and they see the impact of it, they realize how valuable it is. And there are a lot of ways to fund it. You might think that initially we just don't have the money for that kind of luxury. But there are board members who are interested in that sort of work who might fund a special project. There are grants available. There's a lot of interest in this sort of history capture and storytelling right now. It's becoming more and more of a popular topic. So I'm just continuing to reach out to these groups and learn about the different work that they do and talk about how this could be expressed for them in the best way. I think that there's no cookie cutter for this. There are so many ways it's completely customizable to the organization and the people and what they want to get out of it. And it can be just simple sharing with the clients in a circle that lets them get the story off of their chests, to something more sophisticated where we're preparing clients to speak to a legislator or testify in a hearing.
And a lot of nonprofits too, when they have their fundraising galas or they have special events where they invite donors and supporters, they generally put somebody at a podium to speak, to tell their personal story. And yet, as an organ, and I sit on several boards, we don't necessarily invest resources in helping to prepare these people to tell their story, even though it directly impacts our bottom line as an organization. Like, people have to connect emotionally with what we're doing, who we're serving, and the difference it makes in their lives.
That's exactly right. I agree with that 100%. And again, it's not about over scripting them or putting words in their mouth or removing their voice. It's their story. It's what happened to them. It's their experience. But it's just coaching them on the structure and how to overcome those nerves and access that story and really own it in a way that people connect to them emotionally, as you said.
Yeah, and so you have a Twitter account and you have a Facebook page.
That's right.
You do. So on Twitter, it's Urban Story 17?
That's right, at Urban Story 17.
At Urban Story 17. And you collect things from around the web. You collect all kinds of stories and articles, and they are fascinating. And there was one from the UK recently that was actually about a writing program for convicted felons here in the United States.
That's right.
And and it was very powerful. Back to the importance of storytelling. That was an impactful video about storytelling itself, the piece they did itself. And so that's the other thing I think people are not recognizing, is that the use of videos or creating these little mini documentaries or 3 minutes of a video that you tweet or you post on your Facebook, that needs to be well developed because you only have people's attention for a very short period of time.
That's exactly right. And there are statistics about how much more likely a person is to notice an embedded video when they're scrolling through their feed, or how much more impacted they are by a story than data when you're writing your annual report or your impact statement at the end of the year. It's very important to include these stories. I personally am working on getting more of that sort of content in my own website. All of this has grown sort of organically, as I explained, since I've just been in the area for a few years. So I'm in the process now of really building that up. And it was just in this last year that I founded the Urban Stories Project to kind of bring it all together under one umbrella, because I realized the infinite possibility there is for it. I'm just so excited by all of it.
I am too, and in the fact that you are really kind of the yeoman here, you've decided to found an organization and you're doing all of the work yourself, you're coaching other people. I mean, down the road, how do you see your ability to build capacity?
That's a great question. I've worked with some partners on some of this, such as Theater Lab and Street Village. The work that I do with the high school students was through a great organization in DC called Shout Mouse Press. They're a writing program and independent publisher, and their mission is to amplify unheard voices, similar to mine. Their founder and director, Kathy Crutcher, does the same sort of story, just terrific, got it started out of her apartment in DuPont Circle. So I really want to leverage those partnerships. I want to continue to connect with organizations that are doing this kind of work, and also that organizations that need this kind of work. But I want to, where most of the work has been client-focused so far, I'm really opening up the opportunities to work with these organizations. And as I've said, coaching directors one-on-one, working with their board, working with their staff, helping them to write their impact statement or their annual report, helping their clients to testify or speak at busboys or speak at their annual gala. All of those are opportunities that I really want to pursue a little more aggressively going forward.
Well, and I applaud you for that. And I will again remind people that we are in the middle of a legislative session, or we've just started the legislative session, and one of the greatest assets to public policy is finding people to tell a story that connects legislators with the proposed policy in a way that is impactful. So thank you so much, Stacey, for being here. For those of you who are interested in finding out more about the Urban Stories Project, you can find her on Facebook. You can find her at Twitter at Urban Stories 17, and consider the importance of creating a line item in your budget if you're a nonprofit and professional development for your staff as well, because this is really something that you need to know.